Hello, and welcome back to the English Avenue channel. Today, I want to take you on a long journey through one of the most eye-opening stories ever told about money, learning, and the way our minds shape our future. This is the story of Rich Dad and Poor Dad, told through the eyes of a young boy who stood between two completely different teachers. On one side was his real father, the one he loved and respected, who had spent his life working hard, believing in education, and striving for stability. On the other side was the father of his best friend, a man who thought very differently about money, risk, and freedom. From these two men came the lessons that would shape everything he believed about life. Today, I want you to hear that story, not as a short summary, but as a full narration that unfolds slowly, piece by piece, until the lessons become part of you. It begins with a simple observation. Two men, both intelligent, both hardworking, both respected in their communities. Yet one of them struggled financially all his life, always trying to make ends meet, while the other became wealthy, independent, and free. What separated them? Was it luck? Was it talent? Or was it simply the way they thought about money and opportunity? The boy soon learned that the greatest difference between the two fathers was not in their bank accounts, but in their mindset. Poor Dad believed in job security, in climbing the ladder, in working for a paycheck. Rich Dad believed in building systems, in making money work for you, and in creating a ladder that others could climb. When the boy was 9 years old, he asked his real father a question that many children ask at some point: "Dad, how do I get rich?" His father, a well-educated man, with a PhD, answered with the seriousness of an academic. He said, "Go to school, study hard, get good grades, and then find a secure job." To him, wealth came from education, degrees, and the stability of a career. But this answer did not satisfy the boy. He looked around, and saw that many people with great educations were still struggling financially. He began to wonder if there was another way. So he turned to his best friend, Mike, whose father was known as Rich Dad. This man did not have the same level of formal education as Poor Dad, but he had something else: street smarts, financial intelligence, and a keen eye for opportunities. He ran businesses, invested in assets, and was never afraid to take risks. When the boy asked him the same question, "How do I get rich?" Rich Dad smiled and said, "If you want to learn how to be rich, I can teach you. But it will not be the same as school. Are you ready for that?" The boy agreed without hesitation, even though he had no idea what kind of lessons were coming. The first lesson began, not with books or lectures, but with work. Rich Dad told the boy and his friend to come to one of his small stores on Saturday. There, instead of giving them long explanations, he put them to work stocking shelves and sweeping floors. He paid them just a few cents per hour, an amount so small it felt like an insult. For weeks they worked like this, frustrated and confused. The boy began to think, maybe Rich Dad doesn't really care about us. Maybe this is just cheap labor. Finally, after one particularly long day, he decided to confront Rich Dad. He told him he was being unfair, that the pay was too low, and that he deserved more. Rich Dad listened patiently, then leaned forward and said something that would change the boy's life forever. He said, "I'm glad you're angry. Anger is good. It means you're paying attention. But the real lesson here is not about money. It's about choice. Most people get a job, accept a paycheck, and stop questioning. They let money control their lives. They work for money, instead of learning how to make money work for them. I paid you little on purpose, because I wanted you to see how it feels to be stuck, how it feels to work hard, but gain almost nothing. That frustration can either trap you for life, or it can push you to find another way." The boy was stunned. In that moment, he realized that most people never get past that frustration. They complain, they wish for more money, but they never stop to think about how money itself works. Rich Dad continued, the poor and the middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. If you can understand that one lesson, you will see the world differently forever. From that day on, the boy's education with Rich Dad truly began. It was not about memorizing facts or passing exams. It was about changing the way he saw opportunities. He learned that money is not just paper or coins, but an idea. It is a tool that can either trap you or free you, depending on how you use it. He learned that fear and greed are the two emotions that rule most people's financial decisions. Fear of not having enough pushes them to cling to jobs they dislike. Greed pushes them to spend more as soon as they earn more, chasing a lifestyle that always seems just out of reach. Together, these emotions create what Rich Dad called the rat race, the endless cycle of working, earning, spending, and working again, without ever truly escaping. Poor Dad often told the boy, study hard, so you can find a safe job. Rich Dad, on the other hand, told him, study money, so you can find freedom. The contrast was striking. Poor Dad valued traditional education, the kind you get in schools and universities. Rich Dad valued financial education, the kind you rarely learn in classrooms but desperately need in life. Poor Dad would say, I can't afford that, while Rich Dad would say, how can I afford that? The difference between those two statements is enormous. One shuts the mind down, the other opens it up. One accepts limitation, the other looks for possibility. As the boy grew, the lessons became deeper. He learned about assets and liabilities. Rich Dad explained it, in the simplest way possible. An asset puts money in your pocket. A liability takes money out of your pocket. If you want to be rich, focus on buying assets. Most people think their house is an asset, but if it costs you money every month, it's really a liability. The boy began to see that the rich were not just lucky, they played a different game. While most people spent their money on things that drained them, the rich invested in things that created income. Businesses, investments, real estate, these were the assets that built wealth. Poor Dad believed in climbing the ladder of success, one promotion at a time. Rich Dad believed in owning the ladder, or better yet, building a new one. The boy began to notice how his real father's life was filled with worry. Even with a good salary, he was often stressed about bills, about taxes, about the future. Meanwhile, Rich Dad seemed calmer, more in control, not because he never faced problems, but because he had created systems that worked for him. The boy thought to himself, if two men, as different as these, can both be right in their own way, which path should I choose? He realized that he had to make a decision, not just once, but every single day of his life, to follow the safe road of working for money, or the daring road of making money work for him. The lessons were not always easy. Sometimes, Rich Dad gave them challenges that seemed strange. He would say, go start a small business, or look for a way to make money without using any of your own. At first, the boy felt lost. But, slowly, he began to see how these exercises stretched his mind. They forced him to think creatively, to solve problems, to stop waiting for someone else to hand him the answer. One time, Rich Dad told them to figure out how to buy comic books and create a small library for the neighborhood kids. The boys charged a small fee for entry, and soon they were earning more money than their tiny allowances. It wasn't about the comics. It was about learning how to spot an opportunity, build a system, and let it run. Poor Dad never understood this. To him, such activities seemed like distractions from the serious work of school. He worried that his son might fail if he focused too much on business. He wanted security for his son, not risk. And this is where the boy learned one of the most painful truths of life. Sometimes, the people who love you the most will give you advice that holds you back, not because they want to harm you, but because their vision of safety is smaller than your vision of freedom. Poor dad wanted his son to be comfortable. Rich dad wanted him to be free. This battle of ideas went on for years. The boy listened carefully to both fathers, but he began to lean more and more toward the lessons of rich dad. He could see the difference in outcomes. Poor dad's life was filled with respect and honor, but also with financial struggle and eventual disappointment. Rich dad's life was filled with challenges, yes, but also with abundance and choice. The boy realized that the future was not about who was smarter or who worked harder. It was about who understood the game of money. And so, his journey continued, one lesson at a time. He learned that taxes, often seen as a burden, could be understood and managed if you owned businesses or investments. He learned that opportunities are everywhere, but most people don't see them because they're too busy working for someone else. He learned that the real skill of an entrepreneur is not just making money, but solving problems in ways that others overlook. Each of these lessons became part of his foundation, shaping the way he thought about every choice in life. As the boy grew older, the contrast between his two fathers became sharper. Poor dad often said, "The love of money is the root of all evil," while rich dad said, "The lack of money is the root of all evil." Poor dad believed money should not be talked about openly, as if it were something shameful or dangerous. Rich dad believed money should be studied, discussed, and mastered. To the boy, it was like standing in two different worlds. One world told him to avoid risk, the other told him to learn how to manage risk. One world told him to seek security, the other told him to seek opportunity. The boy noticed that most of his classmates were being prepared to follow the path of poor dad: study hard, get into a good university, find a stable job, save money, and retire. Yet he also noticed that even adults who followed this path were often stressed, burdened by debt, and unable to enjoy true freedom. He wondered, if this is the path of security, why does it feel so insecure? The more he thought about it, the more he realized that the world had changed, but the education system had not. Schools taught children how to be good employees, not how to be financially free. Rich dad explained it in simple words: the world is full of people who spend their lives working for money, but very few learn how to have money work for them. That is why opportunities slip past them. They're too busy earning a paycheck to notice the possibilities that could change their lives. He added, school will teach you how to write, how to calculate, how to follow instructions. But if you want to be rich, you must learn things school will never teach you: how to invest, how to build businesses, how to manage risk, and how to control your emotions when everyone else is panicking. One of the most powerful lessons came when Rich Dad explained the concept of financial freedom. He said, "You are financially free when your assets generate enough income to cover your expenses. At that point, you no longer need to work for money because money is working for you." Most people think being rich means having a high salary. But a high salary can disappear overnight if the job disappears. Real wealth comes from assets, things that keep paying you, whether you work or not. The boy began to see the world through this new lens. Instead of asking, "How much do I earn?" he began to ask, "How much do I keep? How much do I grow? How much works for me while I sleep?" He realized that most people fall into the trap of increasing their income but also increasing their spending at the same pace. They buy bigger houses, nicer cars, more gadgets, thinking they are becoming richer, when in fact, they are only becoming more dependent on their next paycheck. Rich Dad warned him, that is the trap of the rat race. You run faster, but the wheel keeps spinning, and you never escape. To drive this point home, Rich Dad gave the boy another challenge. He asked him to look around the neighborhood and spot houses for sale. At first, the boy thought this was boring. But soon, Rich Dad explained how some houses, if bought wisely, could be rented out, creating steady income month after month. That is an asset, he said. Most people buy a house, live in it, and then struggle to pay for it. That is a liability. But if you buy a house and someone else pays you rent, that is an asset. Poor Dad, on the other hand, would often say, "Our home is our biggest investment." But Rich Dad shook his head and said, "Your home is not an investment, unless it puts money in your pocket. Otherwise, it is just an expense you must maintain." The boy found it strange that two intelligent men could see the same object, a house, in such different ways. Yet the results spoke for themselves. Poor Dad worked hard all his life, but financial pressure followed him, even into retirement. Rich Dad built assets, and those assets continued to pay him, even when he no longer worked. Another major lesson came when Rich Dad spoke about taxes. He explained that taxes were originally meant for the wealthy, but over time, they ended up affecting the poor and the middle class the most. Why? Because employees earn money, get taxed, and then live on what is left. Business owners and investors, on the other hand, earn money, spend on expenses and investments, and then pay taxes on what remains. Rich Dad explained the rich use laws and systems to their advantage, not because they cheat, but because they learn how the game is played. If you want to be successful, don't just complain about the rules. Learn them, master them, play smarter than others. The boy realized this was another key difference. Poor Dad believed working harder was the solution, while Rich Dad believed working smarter was the key. Poor Dad thought promotions and raises were the goal. Rich Dad thought financial education and opportunities were the goal. Poor Dad was proud of his government job and the benefits it brought. Rich Dad was proud of the independence and creativity his businesses gave him. As the boy stepped into adulthood, he carried these lessons with him. He noticed how many of his peers fell into debt early in life: student loans, credit cards, car loans. They were already trapped in the rat race before they even started their careers. They believed debt was normal, just a part of life. Rich Dad had taught him differently. Some debt can be useful if it helps you acquire assets, but most debt only makes you poorer. If you borrow money to buy something that doesn't put money back in your pocket, you are digging a hole for yourself. This advice shaped the way he made decisions. Instead of chasing expensive cars or clothes, he focused on building assets. Instead of fearing mistakes, he learned to embrace them as part of the journey. Rich Dad often reminded him, failure is not the opposite of success. It is part of success. Every mistake teaches you something valuable. Don't fear losing money. Fear not learning anything at all. Poor Dad often saw failure as shameful, something to be avoided at all costs. He worried about stability and reputation. Rich Dad saw failure as a teacher, sometimes a harsh one, but always necessary. He encouraged the boy to take small risks, to experiment, to keep learning outside the classroom. He said, "The more you try, the more you learn. The more you learn, the more confidence you build. And confidence is the real foundation of wealth." Another powerful lesson came when Rich Dad talked about choice. He said, "Every dollar you earn is a choice. You can spend it, you can save it, or you can invest it. Each choice leads to a different future." Most people spend because they want instant comfort. Some save because they want safety. Few invest because they want freedom. Which one will you choose? The boy thought long about this and realized that every small choice he made with money was shaping his future, even if he didn't notice it at the time. As the years passed, the boy saw his poor dad's health decline, and with it, the reality of financial stress became even more painful. Despite decades of loyal service, there was little financial security left. Meanwhile, Rich Dad continued to thrive. His businesses grew, his investments multiplied, and he spent his time teaching others, enjoying his freedom, and giving back to the community. It was clear which path led to independence, and which path led to struggle. Reflecting on these lessons, the boy, now a man, understood the deeper truth: wealth is not just about money. It is about mindset, about choices, about education that goes beyond school. Poor Dad was not a bad father. He was loving, caring, and wise in many ways. But his advice belonged to a different world, one where job security was possible. That world was fading. Rich Dad's advice belonged to the new world, where financial intelligence was the greatest skill you could own. And so, the story of Rich Dad and Poor Dad became not just a personal memory, but a guide for millions who would later read it. The lesson is simple, yet profound: the poor and middle class work for money. The rich have money work for them. To achieve freedom, you must learn the difference between assets and liabilities, between working for security and building for independence, between fearing risk and managing risk. The boy's journey teaches us all that education does not end with school. Real education begins when you take responsibility for your financial life, when you stop saying, "I can't afford it," and start asking, "How can I afford it?" It begins when you step out of the rat race and start building a future where your money, your ideas, and your courage create opportunities, not just for you, but for others as well. And so, the story continues, not just in books, but in the lives of those who choose to listen, learn, and act. You too can be part of this journey. You can look at your life today and ask, am I working for money, or is money working for me? Am I living by fear and greed, or am I learning to see opportunities with clarity and courage? The answers to these questions will shape your future. The choice is yours. The lessons are clear. Now it is time to decide which father's advice you will follow. If you enjoyed this narration and learned something valuable today, don't forget to like, share, and subscribe to the English Avenue channel, where we bring you powerful stories and lessons that can transform the way you think in life.